Hi, everybody. This is Adam Ellenboss from Nightlight Astrology. It's June 12th, Tuesday. We're on the brink of a new moon in Gemini. So today we're going to talk about the new moon in Gemini, what to expect from it. We're also going to take a look at a topic that I think is really important. And so I've dedicated some time to it today, and that is the importance of symbolic thinking. Astrology is really, at its finest, astrology could be thought of as a kind of symbolic language. And I want to talk today about why symbolic thinking and symbolism in general is important in our lives. So we're going to talk about that. And then last but not least, I'm going to give you a sneak preview of this week's upcoming Bhagavad Gita for Astrologers class. It's going to be a 4-part series on the Bhagavad Gita for Astrologers starting Thursday night. So I'll tell you a little bit about that at the tail end as well. So let's start off by talking about the new moon in Gemini. The new moon is coming through tomorrow afternoon on the East Coast time zone. We have new moon in Gemini at about 22 degrees, almost 23 degrees. Interestingly, it's happening just as Mercury, the planetary ruler, the one who calls itself at home in Gemini. Mercury will be moving into Cancer. Actually, Mercury moving into Cancer today. So it's an interesting moment because Mercury is just starting to sort of mature as an evening star going to be visible in the sky here. And so we have this, it's a unique moment for a new moon in Mercury's sign. And the reason for that is that, so it's a kind of maturing Mercury, but it's just entered into Cancer, which is the moon's sign. So you have a new moon in Mercury's sign while Mercury is in the moon's sign. This struck me as a wonderful moment to talk about symbolic thinking in general, because this is a new moon that pairs Mercury and the moon together in each other's signs. And one of the things that can represent in our everyday lives is the capacity to reflect on a level that's very intelligent, both emotionally and mentally at the same time. And there is really no better way of describing what astrology itself can do for us than saying that it can help us to reflect both kind of emotionally and empathetically and intellectually and sort of rationally at once. So I was like, wow, this is so cool. This new moon feels to me like a new moon that really signifies astrology at its best. You have really something that's really intelligent, mercurial, it's craft-based, it's something you have to kind of have to have an intellect to do astrology. It's unique among forms of divination. You can have an intellect and do any form of divination, obviously, and most people do. There's a lot of bright people I think generally people who are interested in divination are intelligent, right? But there's something to be said about the particular interest of astrologers in things like math. I mean, it's not like a tarot card where you can flip it open and look at it and have a more sensorial experience. You can look at the art. You can look at the colors of a tarot card. The I Ching is similar to astrology in that you kind of have to be someone who's okay with numbers, degrees, moving, geometric figures in the sky. And you have to be okay at looking at computer programs and, stuff like that. And, most of us studying astrology these days are not having to hand draw charts. I learned how to hand draw charts a few years ago, and I was like, just mad props, to all of my like astrological elders who had to learn how to draw charts by hand, because wow, that is really impressive. But at any rate, my point is that in astrology, you have to have a certain kind of intellectual orientation to get interested in it, because it is a study, unlike other forms of divination, that are a little bit more geared toward the rational mind. Astronomy is like that. The math that originally had to be conceived of or utilized in order to do astrology is pretty complex, more advanced than most of us realize. But there's usually a lot of the times I find that when people are interested in astrology, they're interested in, they have that rational Gemini, Mercury kind of side activated. And not only that, but you have to be able, one of the key skills that you have to have as astrologers, and I don't know, one of my friends or colleagues or even students interested in astrology that isn't interested in wordplay on some level, right? You kind of have to be interested in mixing and matching descriptions and adjectives and doing so creatively and on the fly. So if you want to read charts for people, you kind of have to develop a little bit of confidence with winging it. You gotta be able to talk about symbols somewhat fluidly and creatively, and that takes a kind of mental dexterity. So I really think of Hermes Mercury as just permeating the world of astrology. In fact, the mythical founder that many of the Hellenistic astrologers cited as inspiring the download of a text or treatise or being the original author of an astrological source text is Hermes Trismegistus. So there is a long history of astrology itself being tied to Mercury Hermes. But on the other hand, many people in modern astrology associate the third house with Mercury. And this has to do with the sort of modern sort of 12-letter alphabet where we say like, okay, Aries, Mars, first house, Taurus, Venus, second house, Mercury, Gemini, third house, like that. So we get to the third house, you think, well, that must be the third sign, and Mercury's related to the third sign. And so we think of the topics of the third house, which include, over the long course of astrological history, definitely a fair amount that's said about things like messengers and writers. And, there's definitely a set of topics in the third house that we can correlate with Mercury, and it feels sort of right to do so. But ancient astrologers actually called the third house goddess, and Dea, meaning goddess, and if I have that right, and it was the joy of the moon. And if you look at the neighboring philosophy of Indian astrologers and philosophers coming out of the Vedic tradition in India, and you note that during the Persian occupation of Babylon, which is prior to the sort of advent of Western astrology, Western horoscopic astrology, there was a great commingling of Eastern and Western philosophers and metaphysicians and mystics meeting in these Persian courts. And there is a wonderful book called the Shape of Ancient Thought. It's a comparative study in basically early, ancient Greco-Roman Hellenistic philosophy, Greek philosophy, and Eastern philosophy. And one of the things I love about this text is it really shows how, even though you have people like Stoics and Platonists and yogis, and you've got all these different, the Hermeticists, the alchemists, you got all these different mystical schools and traditions, and there's definitely variance. You can't just say they're all the same. But they share many things in common. One of the things that Indian astrologers say about the moon, and I can't help but imagine that this is part of its place in the third house in ancient Hellenistic astrology as well, is that the moon is related to the mind. And why is the moon related to the mind as well? Why could you make a leap and say the moon is also the mind as a symbol? For a number of good reasons. Because the mind is if you look at Sankhya philosophy, which is one of the great schools of philosophy in India, the material reality is thought on subtler and subtler levels beyond. So gross level would be like me and my body in this room and stuff like that. And then you get subtler and subtler. And the mind is actually a part of the subtle reality. And you can see the mind. One of the ways that the mind is sort of made manifest in Indian philosophy is through the changes in the material world. So like the change of the weather and the change of the leaves on the trees and the seasons and the changes of ecosystems, they all change in the same way that the mind is constantly changing. They're turnings. They're turnings over and over and over, and constant changes and fluctuations. And so the mind is thought of as something that permeates all of material nature, like a complex biomatrix. On a very subtle level, everything is sort of mind. So the Eastern Indian astrologers, you have a very easy connection for them between the mind and material nature. So in the West, it's easier. We tend to say things like, "Oh, the moon is related to the tides and like the gestation of life in a like a woman's body or menstrual cycle, pregnancy. And we say the moon is related to changes in nature, and it's very easy for us to go there. But sometimes in the West, we seem to say, but if you talk about the mind, no, that's Mercury. But actually, another great designation, classically speaking, among ancient mystics is, especially in the East, is that the moon is also the mind, the subtle level of everything producing all of these fluctuational changes everywhere. The moon itself is always fluctuating, snaking in and out of the ecliptic path of the sun, rising up high, coming down low, changing its light all the time. It's the fastest moving planet in our system of astrology. And so the moon is, again, I would dare to say that the moon is also a great symbol for the mind. And that's why I think we see it in the third house, traditionally speaking. But at any rate, the point of saying all of this is to say that when you have the moon and Mercury in this kind of mutual reception with one another at the time of a new moon, you have an interesting pairing of two very mental archetypes. If I had to say what the difference is between those archetypes, just very basically speaking, I would say that you have the difference between the one way of thinking about the two is to look at the difference between the technical, interpretive, hermeneutic mind, the mind that interprets meaning and data, the mind that articulates, cognizes, etc. And then you also have something that is intangible and something that's a little bit more felt, that is communicated in and through things like language and symbol and words and speech and things like that. And to me, when you look at the two together, I really get the feeling of the moon as the somewhat less tangible or somewhat more subtle level of information that's passed around, that includes not just the informational level of things, but a deeper felt level of things. So, for example, the pairing of Mercury and the moon, I would say, is a good symbol for emotional intelligence. Or when you say that a person is not just book smart, but they're sensitive and thoughtful and caring as well as intelligent. You have that kind of marriage of heart and head somehow with Mercury and the moon, though they are also both deeply, in some ways, mental archetypes. So I hope that makes some sense, a little bit of a deep philosophical exploration there. But what that means, practically speaking, for this new moon is that it's a wonderful time to move into a deeper, gentler, more sensitive understanding of yourself, understanding of people around you. There's an opportunity perhaps during this cycle with Mercury moving through Cancer for emotional intelligence to be a really important theme. We're going to see Mercury oppose Saturn. We're going to see Mercury oppose Pluto, all in Capricorn. So this new moon seems to open up a gateway or a doorway somewhere in the heart that says, hey, the mind can be in the heart and the heart can be in the mind. We can actually bring these two things together this month. So that's what I would introduce as a kind of overarching sort of spiritual possibility for the month ahead, is that we can become more intelligent and more sensitive and empathic all at once in the month ahead. There's that opportunity for us. And it might be that happens for you in some specific area of life. Look at the Gemini and Cancer ruled houses of your birth chart. Check out those houses, because those might be the areas in life where, the topics associated with those houses, you may be developing a deeper and more sensitive level of intelligence about something. So let's say it's happening in your financial house. Maybe now is the time to start realizing you developing some deeper sensibilities and some deeper awareness of your patterns in how you spend or how you earn or what you value and how you use money to place value on things. And there might be just a deeper, more felt level of wisdom that's coming through in that area. You have it in the house of friends or the house of your career. Just look for those gateways to be as intelligent as you are compassionate, or to be as sensitive as you are smart. So those are some things to, again, just think about generally speaking for this new moon. The other thing that I really like about it is that it's a really great way to, it's a really great moment to use technology and speech in a more intuitive manner. So sometimes I think, well, whether it's using it or not using it, sometimes we need to not use technology at all. But like maybe there's a moment, where you're looking at your cell phone and, you realize that right now you're wasting time. And you can feel the effect that looking at your cell phone is having on your family or your friends, or God forbid you're on a date and you're actually ignoring the person you're with because you keep checking your phone, or, like whatever else. There could be some more heightened sensitivity to the way that technology is affecting you or the things and environment around you. The other thing that could come through, on the other hand, would be a more intelligent, sensitive use of technology, like realizing, hey, if I use this in a little different way, I could greatly improve my inner experience. How is my heart feeling, and how could I sensitively use the, technological tools that I have at my disposal to help me get a little deeper quality of existence. Mercury in Cancer is saying, on some level, how can I find some sense of a feeling of emotional at-homeness right now in the mind. And if the mind's looking for that, meanwhile you have a new moon in Aries Gemini, then the intelligence is there to help you find it. So, thinking about ways that we can make our life a little bit more emotionally secure, balanced, thoughtful, etc. Also, you may find that this upcoming month, around this new moon especially, that you're also very intuitively sensing what you need, that your needs are becoming more, they're just popping up. Sometimes we don't recognize our own needs for days at a time. I can tell you something, for example. One time when I was in the process of drinking a lot of ayahuasca and doing a lot of yoga and kind of getting on my path with all of that stuff, I had a moment during ceremony where I suddenly realized, and it was probably one of the most mind-shattering simple revelations I had ever had. You ever had those? It's like, it's mind-shattering and it's so basic that you can't believe that it's blowing your mind so much. Well, this was it for me. I realized that I didn't drink water. I was like, oh my, how can you be so, like, I don't drink water. This is awful. And it was just this awareness of something that was so basic, so easy. And so, for me, it was a time in my life where I kind of started drinking water. But what a simple realization. A simple realization about a very basic need. I felt like the world's most intelligent person in that moment. You know what I mean? So similarly, this new moon, with the mutual reception between Mercury and Gemini, may open a doorway for you to just to realize something very simple that you need, and something that you're not giving yourself, something that you're denying yourself, something that you're being willfully ignorant about. Like, we can all do that. We can all be like, well, I know what I need, but I'm not going to do it. And then one day you realize, like, gosh, I know that it's about, like, that I'm like, I have my own free will involved here, but actually being so defiant about something that I need is hurting me. So maybe I should just be nicer to myself, or pick up some habits that are a little bit nicer on my body and my mind, my relationship, everything. So those kinds of nurturing revelations or insights can be really profound right now too. Now, the other thing that you could think about with this kind of transaction between the new moon in Mercury sign and Mercury in the moon sign is also that not just the recollection of something that you need, but also things that you have been meaning to do for a long time, and that you've been putting off for one reason or another, even if they're very simple. It's a great time to reprioritize, because sometimes we put things at the bottom of a to-do list because we consider them, not so important, maybe at work or some other place. And sometimes I'm always shocked at this. I do this myself. I was just speaking of how I do this myself, but you'd be amazed at how sometimes just flipping the things that keep moving toward the bottom of the list that you keep putting off, flipping them to the top and doing those things first, just reorienting the mind and heart toward what we tend to put at the bottom. and putting it first for a while, sort of just that reversal, even if it doesn't stay forever, because sometimes the things at the bottom of the list really aren't as important as the things at the top. But often enough, just giving that little extra time and attention and priority to the things that we keep not prioritizing, it refreshes us somehow. It's like hitting, it's like doing a disc defrag or something. I'm just always amazed at how that works for me. So maybe that'll work for you too. But there's this weird way in which the mental, and often we prioritize things that, again, like mentally, in some objective sense, like, yeah, they should be at the top. And then the things at the bottom that maybe we feel more subjectively about, we put them off. But just that reprioritization, even if it doesn't stay because we got bills to pay and but just that reorientation can breathe new life into the energy that we bring to the things at the top of the list. So just another thing to think about. All right, so we've said some good things about this new moon in Gemini. It's a very social moon. It's good for friendships and for just being stimulated by kindred spirited exchanges with others too. So it's a social moon. It's caring, sensitive, curious. You could easily get overstimulated by things if you, it's very easy to overfeed this kind of new moon, right? So, you can easily also kind of, the mental, emotional level of what you're getting from things that stimulate you right now can go to an extreme, because with the so much moon and water kind of emphasized in the mix of it right now, you can also just sort of, it's one of those you're at the let's say you're at the at Starbucks or something with a friend, and you're like, I had a cup of coffee with a friend and it felt nice or whatever. I had a cup of tea or something, and then you think, this conversation is so good, this conversation is so great, I'm going to have another latte. You know what I mean? And then before you know it, you're into the conversation and you realize now you're like, you have to pee. So you go to the bathroom. The time you get out of the bathroom, you're like, you're twitching, and then you realize that you can't maintain the conversation. And now you're kind of feeling like it's a bummer because you just may have just sort of ruined something that was good by kind of overdoing it. It's very easy to get overly mentally and emotionally stimulated during a new moon like this. You want to be careful of that too. All right, so that's some words that I wanted to say about this new moon, which again is coming through very shortly. It's coming through tomorrow afternoon, East Coast time. So that'll be late morning, West Coast time. And yeah, someone else will have to translate in the box for me if you're in the UK or other parts of the world. But so the next thing I want to talk about in today's video blog is the importance of symbolic thinking. This sort of dovetails with the moon and Mercury, because as I was saying, I actually believe that the moon and Mercury together are a great symbol for, it's a great image in astrology for symbolic thinking in general. What is the reason that I always try to ask the reason, like, why do we do astrology? What is its purpose? And not that there is just one purpose, but what are some of the core purposes? Why do we do this? Why are we attracted to it? And I don't pretend to have, like the only answer, the final answers. I can only give my answers that are important to me, that have become a part of my theology, my faith life, etc. And I've loved listening to how so many different astrologers have answered this question over time. So I say all that comes next, I say after wanting to acknowledge the diversity of responses that there may be to this question, but the importance of symbolic thinking in astrology. I want to read you guys something that comes from a book called Planet Narnia. I'm going to hold it up and show you. This is by Michael Ward, and he's an Oxford scholar who wrote a book called Planet Narnia, which the subtitle is The Seven Heavens, that is the seven planets, in the imagination of C.S. Lewis. So he's an Oxford scholar who basically tried to answer this question that has plagued scholars of both J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis over a long period of time, which is J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is very symbolically cohesive. Like it's a story that has recognizable themes of good versus evil and the carrying of the ring of power and the destruction. there's a lot of mythology that's also recognized and in Tolkien's imagination, and he's considered a sort of master craftsman. And Lewis is sometimes poo-pooed because though he wrote these best-selling sort of children's books with Christian allegories built into them, people criticized the Narnia Chronicles as being somewhat of a mishmash and less clear as to what Lewis was doing, especially outside of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which was widely recognized by people as sort of being the most obvious Christian allegory of Lewis's famous, children's fantasy books. So in trying to answer this question of like, what is C.S. Lewis doing? What is he trying to say? What kind of message is he trying to get across in the Narnia Chronicles? This scholar, Michael Ward from Oxford, who's a Lewis scholar, basically felt like he cracked a code within the Narnia Chronicles. And this book, is as well as a documentary that was made, is a really wonderful argument as to what Lewis was up to. And the argument is that he was embedding each of the 7 Chronicles of Narnia with one of the major archetypal symbols of the 7 traditional planets of astrology. So, this book is about how and why Lewis did it. Really compelling, overwhelmingly compelling evidence that Lewis did this intentionally, but did not tell people about it. He may have told some close friends, but brilliant evidence from his private life and letters that he wrote and things that he wrote in many places about the planets and about astrology and about his love for the symbolism of astrology. And then book by book, Ward breaks down how and why each of the 7 books of the Narnia Chronicles are related to one of the 7 planets. Now, at the very beginning of his book, he spends a lot of time sort of laboring over this question, which was, how did C.S. Lewis understand symbolism in general, and why might he have been interested in astrological symbolism in particular and things like that? So in this section of the book, toward the very beginning, Michael Ward is discussing how Lewis thought of symbol in general as a writer and as a theologian and stuff like that. And I want to read this because it's really, really important for us as astrologers. And I'm actually going to close my window because there's a big train going on outside. Hold on. As a train passing outside was very loud. So Lewis's definition of a symbol. Lewis equated symbolism roughly with sacramentalism and distinguished both from allegory. In a work of allegory, the allegorist takes something immaterial, love for instance, and provides for it a material representation, as in the form of a god called Amor disporting himself in a beautiful garden. In symbolism, the symbolist works the other way around. This is from Lewis. If our passions, being immaterial, can be copied by material inventions, that is allegories, then it is possible that our material world in its turn is a copy of an invisible world. As the god Amor and his figurative garden are to the actual passions of men, so perhaps we ourselves and our real world are to something else. The attempt to read that something else through its sensible imitations, to see the archetype in the copy, is what I mean by symbolism or sacramentalism. So, this is a really important distinction. And he has another quote that reads like this. He's talking about Spencer's The Fairy Queen, which is a famous book. Allegory is not a puzzle. We must not sit down to examine the Fairy Queen detail by detail for clues to its meaning as if we were trying to work out a cipher. That is the very worst thing we can do. We must surrender ourselves with childlike attention to the mood of the story. So, here's what Lewis is saying there. First of all, he's saying that a lot of the times we read an astrology chart, right? And I'm going to translate this into the realm of astrology. We read an astrology chart and we think to ourselves, the astrology chart is allegorical. It's if I decode it correctly, it will tell me something important about the material world, right? And this is what a lot of people pay astrologers for. We say, hey, I'm going to pay you to decode the stars and tell me how they map out what's going to happen to me with my money this year, or what's going to happen with my love life, or something like that. So we have a tendency to think of astrology allegorically. That is to say that we are trying to interpret and decode it so that we can understand what it represents in the material world, which is what we're invested in. That's what we're interested in. That's what we want to know about. C.S. Lewis's definition of symbolism, or what he calls symbolism as sacrament, is saying that actually, if you take his definition and apply it to astrology, what we're doing is we are taking astrology and applying it to the circumstances of material life in order to see reflected in our material lives something that is of eternal value. And that's a completely different kind of use of symbol. This is how Lewis defines the difference between allegorical thinking and symbolic thinking. In sacramental or symbolic thinking, in other words, what we are trying to do is you look at the world and you look at your life, and what you're trying to, rather than decoding the astrology to see what's going to, just like what's going to happen to me in this material world, you're trying to read the symbols in relation to the material world so that you might penetrate through the veil of the material world into something eternal. That's a different operation as an astrologer. So astrologers who practice in that way, we have a different agenda as an astrologer. There's another example that C.S. Lewis uses, and he goes like this. This is an example. So let's say one day you walk out into your backyard, and in your backyard there's a shed, and you walk into the shed. Now you're in a contained structure, and inside the shed there is a single beam of light coming down through a hole in the tin roof, and in some ways the inappropriate use of symbolism, the inappropriate use of a symbol, is when we look right at it and we say, oh, look, there's a beam of light, right? Then we say that, and we try to decode it, that's what this means, etc. Lewis said, there's the appropriate way to use a symbol within a work of art, within a novel, for example, within his Narnia Chronicles, is to what the symbolist is doing is, rather than looking at the beam of light, they're moving into the beam of light and looking up through the beam of light so that they can use the beam of light. By means of the beam of light, they see up and out of the shed into the sky and world outside of the shed. So rather than looking at that light, you move right into it and see by means of it to the other world. Lewis said the appropriate use of a symbol is always the symbolist, as an artist or an astrologer, is trying to bring people into the beam of light of the symbol so that they may see by means of it to something eternal. So good astrology, while it may tell you something about your money, or it may tell you something about your health or anything like that, none of which is off limits, but it should do so in a way that takes you into the beam of light with the astrologer, so that you see by means of the symbols, and that experience becomes primary and outshines whatever information you glean from the session with the astrologer. The fact that you were able to see by means of symbolism itself is a kind of divine intervention in life. It's something that pierces the veil of our mundane awareness, and even while delivering the goods, telling us something perhaps accurate about life, doing something concrete. Oh, look, that's a beam. That's your money. That's what's going to happen. But the experience, the way that the symbol is used, the mood, the feeling that you enter into the symbol, and it allows you to see. And the astrologer, in order to do that, can never use just purely predictive language. The language has to be both predictive and poetically satisfying to the soul. It has to point beyond itself while simultaneously offering valid prognostication. And this is why so many people are sometimes caught over whether we should have modern or traditional astrology. Should we have descriptive, poetic, rich, subjective, inner life, psychological astrology? That's like saying we should be looking through the beam up to something beautiful and transcendental, right? But at the same time, we have to recognize that when the mind walks into the shed, the first thing it sees is the beam. It takes a kind of move into the beam before you can see by means of it out into the world above it. So you also have to acknowledge the material world that we live in, which is to a large extent cyclical, predictable, operating according to laws of cause and effect, etc. So astrology as a traditional language gives us a set of rules, and it gives us a set of tools that are more or less concrete and objective. In mood, they're apparently concrete and objective. But when you use them appropriately, you are the real work is, even as you're delivering some kind of prognostication, the goal is still larger than that. The goal is to move the soul so that it sees through that beam of symbolism with you back up to the divine, or back into the divine, or wherever it might be. So I wanted to say all of this today because I've been getting a lot of questions about symbolism and astrology and traditional versus modern, and a lot of new students who are studying into my course right now and trying to study the difference between modern and traditional forms. So I hope that this is interesting. Here's some notes that I have written down to add to the points that we're making here. The activity of the symbolist, the astrologer as symbolist, is not, in the end, the activity of interpreting symbols is not the final activity. This is also very important. Even though astrology helps us turn somehow by means of an astrological session, you get both information, but you also have that reorientation of mind and heart. The symbols become a transparent medium through which you re-glimpse the reality of your eternal soul, and it's part of the grand whole. But that in itself is not the final activity. If you've had that experience with astrology, it's very tempting to say, well, this means that I love astrology. I love astrology because this is what astrology does, or this is what astrology is. It is that feeling. It is that experience that I just had. And the very, very important that we say, no, it's not. It facilitates that. It facilitates that experience, and it's very sacred because of that. But that actual turn that you feel when astrological symbolism is reorienting you toward the reality of your soul, and addressing your material circumstances, but also pushing you beyond to see that glimpse of light. And I don't want to sound dogmatic here, but it's the turn of the heart. It's the acknowledgement of your life and the turn of heart simultaneously that matters. And in order for that, the spirit of that moment to be maintained, we need something more than just astrology. I dare say that, not that I know exactly what it is. I have ideas, I have thoughts, but this is why I'm not just an astrologer, but I'm also a yoga teacher. And my wife and I own a yoga studio, because at the end of the day, that turn, how do you deepen that? How do you find other ways of getting to that space? How do you live in that space? How do you find that well in everyday life, and then draw from it and sustain spiritual health from it? And the more you drink from that place, how do the other things that keep you caught up and distracted in the world of literalism and objects, and mistaking the stuff of this world for the eternal in its midst? How do you get closer to that? And it's not, you can't just you cannot just get into you can't just do it with astrology. And that's, people can feel totally free to disagree with me, of course, but I don't believe at the end of the day that astrology alone can facilitate that. Even if you're doing it full time, like, I do it every day, all the time. And even then, I still need physical exercise and, lifestyle and, meditation and prayer. And there's so many different things that we need to be able to continually facilitate that turn. It's very important. So at any rate, that's another thought to add into the mix. So all astrology is, in a sense, from this standpoint that I'm presenting today is an activity of reorientation and remembrance. Its main accomplishment is in addressing certain elements of our material life because they're valid and important, but also in helping us find the eternal in its midst, so that we don't over-privilege this stuff. So, at any rate, that's another, just a point there. Astrology is therefore teaching us to see, in a sense, all of time, past, present, and future, as simultaneous. Plato said it best, inspiring probably the first serious generation of astrologers. Time is a moving image of eternity. So, at any rate, we need. Astrology captures the heart. Even though astrology captures the heart, you think of the study of health medicine. The study of health and medicine is nothing if it doesn't aid in actually becoming healthy. It's like a doctor who can't take their own advice about knowing how to take care of the body, or a nutritionist who doesn't eat well. Astrologers who have a sense of the eternal but don't work to also find ways of bringing that into their daily existence, will mistake astrology as the source. And that's, to me, that's something that, one of the reasons that I tell this to my students too, is that it's important for us to love astrology while recognizing it as the beam of light by means of which we are sacramentalizing the world and seeing beyond it. And so we have to be careful of thinking too highly of astrology. It's okay and it's important to recognize that sometimes the tool by means of which you do something is important and beautiful, and you can't discard it or put your nose up at it or something like that. But you also can't overprivilege it. And so it's good sometimes to have the feeling that astrology is a means of symbolic thinking and what that does for us as a soul, but not getting overly lost in it. So it's important to sometimes be like, not my birth chart. Astrology something I need to put on the shelf for a while. It's or even to have periods of time where you're in deep doubt or dislike of astrology. That's all. It's all part of most forms of any form that can help us on the spiritual path. Has to be recognized as a form, and for it to function. And so the times that we go through some level of disenchantment with astrology are very important for that reason. Anyway, so let's see. All right. So finally, we have one of the reasons that I'm putting all of this together today is also invite everybody to check out the 4-week series called the Bhagavad Gita for Astrologers. Begins Thursday night. We'll be looking at the Bhagavad Gita in a 4-part series and asking the question as we break the Bhagavad Gita down into sort of 4 parts with one of my teachers, Hari Kirtana Das. He's been teaching the Bhagavad Gita for decades. He teaches yoga philosophy at our yoga studio for the teacher training programs. And he'll be leading this 4-part series. And at the end of every class, we'll be asking the question, so how does this apply to us as astrologers? How does the particular theology and values of the Bhagavad Gita translate to us as astrologers? Which, if nothing else, may be interesting for you. And for some other people, it may be the gateway into some marrying of yogic practice with astrology practice. So that's what I've got for you guys. It's free. You can join for free. We collect donations during the talk if you're able to. But the information is on my website. If you go to nightlightastrology.com and go to the events page, you can find. Put it in the box right now, nightlightastrology.com. Go to the events page. You can find the login link. We start up Thursdays, and let me just double check the time. I want to make sure I don't misquote it. So we begin 6:30 to go 6:30 to 8:30 Thursday nights for the next 4 weeks, starting this week. So I hope you all can join, and I hope today was an interesting thought exercise. I felt like it was a cool thing to talk about given the upcoming mutual reception between Mercury and the Moon, which call to mind the ability of the mind and heart to come together, to make sacred the world around us, but to also understand it as a means by which we can see the eternal in our midst. So I will look at questions now. I see a bunch of chats in the box here, but I haven't looked at them yet. So let me go scroll back up and see. Resources for Goddess in the third, please. There's a wonderful lecture by Demetra George on the topic. You can probably find it on her website, which I would guess you just Google search Demetra George. I don't know her website offhand. And she has a lecture on the third house that has a pretty rich treatment of the goddess in the third house. You can also check out my website on the audio store for a full, probably 60 or 90-minute talk on the third house and the goddess. Good afternoon. Hello. Hi, guys. Totally agree. Hello. Good afternoon. Lewis was a druid. He was a member of the Order of Bards of Ovates and Druids, OBOD for short. Very interesting. I'm not aware of that. That's interesting. If you have a reference for that, Kirsten, that would be interesting if there's some kind of documentation about that. If I hear new things, I always like to check it out. Sorry, need to run, shared. Well, okay, good. I hope you can check it out later, Alexi. Jessica, this is all so subjective, potentially arbitrary to me. There may be plenty of artfulness to the soul in materiality. Yeah. The point of what Lewis is saying is that the material world is full of the reflections of eternity. He's a real Platonist in that respect. So, and so from this standpoint, for whether you're talking about yoga or Platonism or different, a couple other different classical schools of mysticism that would fit in Neoplatonism and other things, you're talking about the world not as evil. That there some more hardcore fundamentalists or fanatics who might treat it like that, but the material world is thought of as temporary, and that there is a thought to be a distinction between the conscious living entity, the soul, the spirit soul, and the material form that it inhabits. Where the material dies, the spiritual is thought to be eternal. So the project is not about the material being bad in contrast to the spiritual, but rather that when we get stuck in the material as though it's all that there is, it does have a kind of dark power. And so the idea is to learn to see symbolically, really, to see eternity reflected in its midst. And that's what astrology is teaching us how to do, in a sense. So I hope that helps. I definitely dislike Jessica Irene, this Taurus second house moon likes your comment. Dang, I'm late. Oh, okay. Jessica Irene, I definitely dislike the risk of potentially coming off derisive, but I also am always concerned about the seductive qualities of desiring a light to be more than a light. Yes. Well, I don't know exactly what your beliefs are, but they may well differ from the sort of Platonic yogic strands of the mystical yogic Platonic strands that I'm, mentioning here, where the material reality is thought to be reflective of an original spiritual world or source. And if that doesn't resonate with you, I can imagine that you would be concerned with that. So that's what I have for you guys. I don't think there's any more questions. Nicia and Ra and Rochelle. Hey, I don't always get to see who's here, but your names just popped up on my thing, so I can actually see you guys. Nice to see you guys. Gad's here. I don't know if you're still here or not, but hey, Gad. Anyway, good to see all of you guys. Any last questions before we go for the day? Okay, none. Good. Well, thank you, everybody, and I hope you'll be able to attend the upcoming Bhagavad Gita for Astrologers series on Thursday night. And otherwise, have a very happy new moon tomorrow, and hope to catch you guys again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.